The vice president has had the full, not just the full, but the enthusiastic, delirious, delighted, unified, coherent, cohesive support of her party over the past week. Something people weren't sure was going to happen. Man, the party really lined up behind her, a who's who of Democratic up-and-coming leaders, including Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. You name them in the party, they are behind Vice President Harris, and she has, in this past week, kicked her campaign into high gear in a stunningly short amount of time. According to the campaign, they have recruited 170,000 new volunteers since last Sunday and held 2,300 events to mobilize grassroots supporters. This past weekend alone, they've also raised, wait for it, $200 million in 7 days, with 2/3 of that money coming from first-time donors. There's also, on the large dollar side, I think they have another $150 million in commitments of money going potentially into super PACs and other places. The money is just coming in hand over fist. Vice President Harris, for her part, she's embraced all that enthusiasm naturally, and loves the fact that the base has rallied to her and that the institutional part of the party has. But she's also cautioning that this campaign is far from over, far from won, a long way from that. She tells supporters this weekend, this is what she said. She said, "We are the underdogs in this race, but this is a people-powered campaign and we have momentum." And if you look at the polling, that's certainly true. Claire, Eddie, Mike, Memily, you're all back. And Mike, I want to ask you that question because we're talking about this, about the politics of this right now. There's the fact that there's no, when people talk about the pros and cons of the different ways this could have gone once President Biden had decided to step aside, the fact that whatever the pros of the reason why you would want to have an open, competitive contest, as some people wanted, with a mini primary, with town hall meetings or debates or whatever. The biggest downside to it is that trying to start a presidential campaign at this late date, from a standing start, building an operation, a digital team, a field team, a fundraising team, I would say impossible. Impossible. She, Vice President Harris, is inheriting a team that's already out there in all the battleground states, and a really savvy digital operation, and a bunch of people who do rapid response, and people who are obviously raising money. But there's still a lot to do real fast. And the integration of her existing team, the existing Biden forces, and potentially bring in some people from the outside who have the esteem and reverence of the party, those are all on the table. Talk about where things stand right now in terms of the bootstrapping, the combination of bootstrapping and inheriting of an existing operation, the melding of that as we sit here today.
I mean, operationally, this campaign was ready to go. I mean, they have a really strong foundation to build on, and the team that was helping build that is still there, very much overseeing it. I think the big question is, what is the Harris message, right? She's enjoying this honeymoon period. She is able to ride on that enthusiasm, that excitement. But there is going to be a point when these voters want to know, well, what would you do differently than President Biden? What is your vision for the country? And there's, I think, a good debate to be had about whether she does need to develop her own distinct political identity at this moment. Because one of the failings that people who are close to President Biden felt about his debate performances, all he needed to do on that debate stage was a noun, a verb, Dobbs, a noun, a verb, democracy, a noun, a verb, felon, right? And that would have been enough for those voters who were just starting to tune in to get you through to November. She has an even shorter timeline now, and perhaps that's all she needs to do on the stump with her running mate at this point. The focus, more than anything, is now back on Donald Trump from the view of so many Democrats. And former President Trump's going to have to be out there on the campaign trail more this fall, too. And the more that they can run on enthusiasm, run on the future, and then point to him, that might be enough to get them through November.
Eddie, 99 days to November 5th.
Right.
20 days until the Democratic convention starts. You are suddenly, unexpectedly, the nominee of your party. You have to pick a vice president. You have to figure out make new ads that are going to go on the air in the face of negative ads coming in from the other side. You have to figure out how to integrate these teams. You have to do a whole bunch of research on yourself that you haven't had really done. You've done some of it, but not in the way that a presidential campaign that's been ramping up for a year and a half would have done. What if you think about what they need to get done, Vice President Harris's operation between now and let's just focus on the convention. what's the high order bit? Like, what are you focused on? What's the thing that the big thing that you got to get right, or it could really cripple your campaign for what happens after the convention?
Well, I don't want to presume that I'm a political operative. Like
no,
but
you're a voter.
But I am a voter, and I think the two things that have to happen, that must happen, right, is that she has to introduce herself to the country. This is who I am. These are my animating values and qualities, and she has to be clear about her message. And I think we have the beginnings of that. We're not going back. And what does that mean? We're not going to go back to what this guy's trying to do, and we're not going to go back to the old categories, the old divisions, those old divisions between left and right, the old divisions between liberal and conservative. What we're going to try to do is govern for everyday ordinary folk. We're going to address the conditions of workers, those folks whose noses are barely above water. We're going to try to deal with those kitchen table issues without the baggage of our previous politics. And I think if she leans into that, we are not going back, and begin to give voice to what a substantive notion of the public good is, right, John? I think a substantive notion of what the public good is by way of policy. Now we're opening up the door to a different kind of conversation. But maybe I'm sounding like an academic egghead in this moment, right? But I do think, what does it mean to give content to the idea that we're not going back?
Right.
Other than just simply that guy is the past.
You sound like an egghead, Eddie, but we love eggheads. And eggheads are us. I want to put up a little, here's a full screen New York Magazine cover. Let's put that up. Can we put that up? There it is. Welcome to Camelot. We've had a lot of discussion about this. We've got Charlie XCX. She's Brat. Mike Memley, he's Brat. Claire McCaskill, she's Brat. She's Brat too. We've never seen anything. People have made this comparison, Claire, a lot in the last week, which is, we haven't seen anything like this since Obama. She's out there in social media. She's all over TikTok. There is this buzz around her that you can't buy it, you can't learn it, you can't prepare for it. You catch it. It's organic, right? When you see all this as you sit there out there in Missouri, do you have any worries about the way that Hollywood and the glamour and the glitz that is kind of going to attach itself to her, that is obviously super important for unifying the party, for bringing money, all those things, but that in the battleground states, among 6 or 7% of the people who haven't decided yet who they want to vote for and are going to decide the election, that some of those things might not wear well over the next 100 days, even if they're absolutely incredibly exciting and positive for her in this moment?
Yeah, I'm not so worried about that. A sprint really is to her benefit. We're the only country that puts people through the minefield, painful, we're going to tear the bark off your tree with negative attacks for, months and months on end. This sprint requires simplicity, and simplicity is her best friend. And I would push back a little bit on the honeymoon notion. Yes, there was this incredible release of pressure due to the painful mess our party was in, with a president that we all loved and respected, and a reality that became clear at the debate, and the sense of urgency about beating Trump. All of that, yes, the pressure was released and certainty has arrived, and everyone is excited about that. But she's also done a really good job. I think people have underestimated Kamala Harris. I think because of her presidential campaign, there was this notion that somehow she was not up to this job. She's up to it. She knows what she's doing. And I think she's going to pick a vice president that grounds this ticket in a way that takes some of that Hollywood glitz off of her candidacy. And she's going to speak in very plain terms, which is really important, about freedom and about the future, about joy and laughter and lightness and aspiration and opportunity, the kinds of things that this country is craving right now because of all the darkness that Donald Trump has brought on to the political scene. And by the way, they're going to come after her, John, with all these negative ads, which are so yesterday. And does anybody think that the swing voters are really going to be persuaded by ads coming from a guy that they know can't take a breath without lying? I just don't think a barrage of Willie Horton type swift boat-esque bull, is going to really slow her down as long as she does what Eddie says. She's got to get her bio out there. She's got to get people have a sense of how she's fought and overcome the odds and done well in America because of the values that we all care about. She's in a really good place. I would much rather be on her side of this equation than Donald Trump's.